Ooh, what's up, Craig? Welcome to the roundup episode of the Broom Radio podcast. I think it's March 28th in Australia, March 27th in the Americas, and I'm joined by some of the members of the Broom. We've got like a pretty extensive injury list right now, and it may or may not have anything to do with the eclipse or anything that's going on in our solar system. But we have a little bit of illness, we have a little bit of family illness, and then we have a little bit of vacation going on. And I hope y'all are well. How are y'all doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
Now proceed to talk for 25 minutes about my metaphysical and physical state. No, I'm doing pretty well. I'm in good health. I've been working through a lot of stuff in my right shoulder socket.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I can't say I don't feel like I can describe exactly what's going on with my right shoulder, but I have some kind of vague notion directionally.
Anything you want to share with the class?
Well, we just finished up a 4-week series on standing meditation in a lineage called Spa.
Yes, we did.
And it was going off as I was preparing for that last session, and the synchronicities were pretty wild leading up to it. We talked a little bit about it in the session itself, but you wouldn't know about that if you're not part of the 000 lineage space. And even if you are part of the 000 lineage space and you weren't there live, you wouldn't know about it because I haven't gotten around to uploading the episode yet. But, and I realize I have a fat backlog of things to upload and process in terms of recordings that have been happening live in the Broom Radio. But I'll say that the morning of that transmission on standing meditation, I did a transmission in T on water and fire as alchemical symbols. And then I got the sense that the standing meditation was going to be about death. And then Anna had sort of synchronistically, I guess I'll call it, seen an article about water cremation, which is, of course, usually like a fire-based ritual. So I felt like that was pretty lit. And then I had been walking that day for 16 kilometers, which I think is about 10 miles, in a forest called John Forest National Park, which, yeah, I somehow sort of perhaps insensitively by many people's standards had been walking through while playing a song called Wildfire, and then I played a song called Water by Tila. So it was all kind of lining up, and yeah, my shoulder was buzzing before that session, and it's sort of been buzzing ever since. Does that answer your question, Anne?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I would say like in my lineage is like the right side of the body for I always get it mixed up, but like XY based bodies, I think, male bodies. If that's not too triggering to say. Tends to be like what we call like yang focused or like involved in setting contexts. And the left side of the body for XY bodies is about like filling awareness with contexts. And like in my lineages at least, the flip is true for like femme bodies or XX bodies. So I feel like it has something to do with taking up space.
Interesting. That's interesting because during tea, I was I was feeling my right shoulder, but that would be different.
Your yin shoulder.
Yeah.
What were you feeling in your yin shoulder?
It was just sore.
Mm. Yeah, what's interesting because also in my lineage is like the right side tends to be like patrilineal energy, and the left side tends to be matrilineal energy, like kind of up to the root, but I would say like it tends to percolate further up than that. And recently I've been kind of meditating on how the root is sort of like the peak of a mountain from the perspective
Ooh.
of Earth ancestors, at least. But you can imagine how, like, if water starts flowing down one side of the mountain, it'll probably continue to flow around that side of the mountain, unless, like, some enterprising land stewards or mining engineers or dam engineers have kind of like carved out like a canal which spirals around the mountain, right? So yeah, I think like something I've always been kind of interested in is how that polarity flips, but like the lineage of like like one's father's side is consistent between different bodies, and what that means for like how yang and yin are expressed in male and female bodies. I don't think it's like a
So
simple thing, but go on.
so you said according to your lineage's right side is patrilineal,
Mm-hmm.
but doesn't correspond to like you're saying for me, then the right side would be yin.
That's my sense. Yeah. Well, that's like general. Like it can change, right? Like I think
Yeah.
like all lineages all lineages which talk about metaphysical energy talk about being able to sort of like flip which hands giving and which hands receiving. Um,
Mhm.
but I'd say that like for the most part, um, and like even like the terms giving and receiving, I feel like are not quite the same thing as yang and yin. But yeah, for the most part, like
Mhm.
female bodies or like XX bodies would be like patrilineally yin, and male or XY bodies would be patrilineally yang. And yeah, you could say most male bodies would be matrilineally yin, and most female bodies would be matrilineally yang.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, this is not what I thought we were going to talk about, but I would be curious to hear what y'all make of that.
Hi, y'all.
Yeah, she's alive.
He lives.
I was low key like, how is everyone gonna respond when I do this voice reveal? Like, what's gonna happen?
She's off the injury list.
Yay.
I missed your voice, Hoda.
Oh, thank you. It's back. It's back. But
I wouldn't
yes,
say
I
I
was.
missed it, but I was looking forward to hearing it again. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
whatever.
Yeah, front with your other friends, Nobu, not me, okay?
Sus. Podrock's like sus. I don't know what's suspicious about that, but we can talk about it later. What were you gonna say about that?
Well, I wanted to comment on the what seems like y'all were alluding to, which is like binary cultivation of energies. And I didn't come up with that phrase. Like that's totally part of some of the work that's been happening, I feel, in the 000 lineage space. But what it made me think of as well is how this eclipse kind of, I don't know, it kind of hit me on that kind of like we're speaking to like meridians and sidedness. I feel like that's kind of where the eclipse really impacted me, where I just became like super aware and like conscious, I guess you could say, of like what side ancestral energies were like accumulated in my body and like what side of my ancestry that was associated with. And so I'm curious, not to like zoom into the eclipse topic, but I am curious if any of that was like present for y'all during the eclipse, or yeah, just in general, how the eclipse was maybe.
Yeah, I want to hold space for that question. And also my throat's like, Have y'all not been like communing with your ancestors or something?
Affirmative grunts, basically. Sorry, that was all that I could come up with. I'll hold space.
Which of your ancestors were grunting?
I don't know.
I mean, I guess if like your right shoulder is hurting, I wonder if your patrilineal ancestors are grunting. I mean, that's like my sense. And what are they grunting about?
Yeah, spill the tea.
Pasta salt.
Yeah.
2 sugars, thank you. Give me 3 grunts for 2 sugars and 1 grunt for 4 sugars. What about you, Ahmed?
Yeah, I was about to pass the mic to Ahmed. Like,
You also grunted, so you're
I
on the
feel
mic
like
now.
Oh, dang.
Very convenient. Getting a call, very convenient.
Oh, he's getting a
That's
call.
good timing. That's really cute. Really cute.
Which ancestors are calling you?
Where's the thing?
Hoda says, I'll say my ancestors grunt when it's vibing.
Yeah, that's what I felt like my grunts were about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe people interpreted them as something else.
Yeah, I felt like I was getting like mostly patrilineal grunts in the last few days. Maybe a few matrilineal grunts. The patrilineal grunts were like question mark grunts, and the matrilineal grunts were sort of like affirmative / it's about time grunts.
Block that tea.
I was gonna say I saw Lexi write something about patrilineal ancestry too.
I wonder if it's okay to read out. I think in general it was just like a read about how lots of people, according to Lexi's perspective, have been healing or working with their patrilineal ancestry. So I guess the sidedness is the conversation on sidedness feels timely, because I'm like, I wonder if any gaps are being filled in, even if people are listening asynchronously. I'm like, let us know how you work with your ancestors, because I'm curious.
Yeah, yo. I want to know.
Definitely feel like discourse about working with ancestors online and like spiritual parasocial media is like 5% of the discourse. I don't feel like it's like enough.
What do you feel like is missing, Abu?
Like 47%.
I know, but like what constitutes that percentage for you? Like, what do you feel like is missing from the
like
conversation?
what would I like people to be grunting about ancestrally?
Yeah.
Well, I did see like one person. His name's Tyler Alterman, and he's been following me for a while. And like, I always be like, he's pretty interesting, so I was like, follow him back. But then my body's like, no. But he was posting about
Sorry, go ahead.
I think he was posting about, if I recall correctly, he was posting about people assuming that their ancestors are dumb, and
Dumb.
how it doesn't really like feel good to him. That's like my very, very rough, grunty paraphrase of it.
Did
And I
you
was
say
reading
dumb?
that. Yeah, like dumb or like primitive.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Which, yeah, it's like not how I would have expected most people would feel about their ancestors. Because I feel like we live, I'll say that like when I talk to people who are older than me, let's say like 60, 70, they kind of admit that things got a lot harder after the 1970s. But I feel like compared to say like what our ancestors have been through for the last like 170, 180,000 years, we live in like relatively like good times. So
Yeah.
by extension, I would say that the fact that they managed to like get us here speaks to their wisdom.
Facts. Yeah.
So for people to see a reflection of how other people talk about their ancestors, if at all, as being dumb and or primitive was kind of surprising to me.
That's surprising to me too. I don't know that I've really come across, I mean, at least like for people who I feel like are talking about or who are like engaging in discourse about ancestor work on parasocial media, like I haven't really seen much of that.
Mm-hmm. What do you see?
So like,
I'll go
Go
on.
ahead.
Somebody else.
I was gonna dovetail off of what Anna said, is that I don't see it explicitly. Like my experience is more like I see people like kind of, a lot of practitioners I see are like mad dashing to like fill what feels like to me or what I sense is like ancestral gaps. So like maybe they're not doing it consciously, but I get a sense that it's like something people either want to do or like already doing unskillfully, maybe. But yes, I do want to hold, I do want to hold space because I do think Nova's question was really wise. So yeah.
I feel like the 5% that I see, let's say, is usually, I'm gonna say people of like, I'm gonna say, yeah, definitely people of like what appear to be like African lineages. And then maybe like 15% of that is like people of, I'll say like East Asian lineages. And I would say it tends to be like super reverent, which is also part of why what Tyler Alterman was saying surprised me. But then I also feel like what he was saying would probably explain why it's maybe like 5% of what I see on spiritual parasocial media and not say like 49 or, even like 75%, which is what like I think Hoda was alluding to. 76.
I was projecting. I was like, that's what I would like it to get to, just to be clear.
It's almost an A. It's almost an A.
Right. Close, but no cigar.
But yeah, I could imagine if people thought, like, kind of assumed that their ancestors were dumb and or primitive, then they wouldn't talk about revering them that much.
Right. Well, I also have seen I have seen people talk about I've seen people say before like that you get to like you can like pick and choose which ancestors you work with or something.
That seems skillful to me.
So I'm like, yeah. But also but I guess also part of me kind of wonders if like it's a little bit avoidant sometimes too.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, well, these ancestors suck, so I don't want to work with them.
Totally.
Because, like, I don't know, my experience with ancestor work is like you do have sovereignty, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, I thought the whole point of ancestor work was like for me personally, I feel like a big part of it is like being like comfortable with conflict
Affirmative grunt.
and like working through conflict, you know?
That's the tea. That's the tea. We got
Rock
like
it.
some affirmative grunts in the chat. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's skillful to. I mean, I guess like the way I experience it is that like I want to work with all of my ancestors eventually, and then some of some of my some of my earth ancestors. No, I'm just laughing because I was like, I'm going to talk about like earth and sky ancestors, and I feel like there's a little ripple in the pond. But some of my earth ancestors and most of my sky ancestors are like, not yet, or like your plate's full kind of thing. And I feel like that, I wouldn't say it's like skill, because I'm not kind of like being like, okay, like you and not you and not you and you're cool.
Right.
It's more like I don't know what the word would be. Like it's just more like kind of listening.
Yeah.
Not just like applying like a technique or something. But that's kind of just how it works for me.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I think there's always like that kind of testing, right? Like I feel my field is like, okay, am I reaching out to them? Oh no, like they're still sleeping. And then like I'll be like, oh no, like he's got indigestion. You know what I mean? Like I'm always kind of like just lightly feeling out the parts of my ancestral I'll just say reservoirs, I guess. To see which ones are kind of ripe and which ones I have capacity for, and which ones have capacity for 2024, I guess.
No, it's funny because you're laughing, and I was like, time has a lot to do with it. Like when I'm probing my ancestors, I literally will ask that sometimes, like, who's ready to digest what's happening in current time with me, or like who needs help, digesting, or like like if there's similarities in my current timeline and their timeline, there's some, I would say, like interwoven similarities in that way through my ancestral reservoir. But it does feel, I can say that for me, it feels collaborative in that way, where like I can't avoid working with certain ancestors, but some will communicate with me like, we're not ready yet, thank you but no thank you, and I'll respect that.
DND, do not disturb.
Yeah, totally.
This hotel room does not need cleaning.
Yeah. We're good.
Don't at my matrilineal ancestors.
I was thinking about them.
Were you?
Yeah.
That's kind of sweet.
That is sweet.
Because I was like, because I kind of said about like, people with like apparently to me African lineages and East Asian lineages. And I was like, okay, well, like I do know a couple of people from Jewish lineages who work with their ancestors. Which is not to say that more don't. Maybe they're just not on, in my circles on parasocial media or whatever. But there is some representation there.
100%.
It's very interesting because I mean I know like in like mainstream.
Sorry, I didn't mean to throw off your transmission, but I'm like, wait, is she gonna be aloof at the fact that? Okay, anyways, but go on.
But anyway, I didn't want to name anybody.
Right, I'm sorry.
There are some sensitivities about that particular name, I guess. Like, I just saw Zone of Interest just for some context, so you know what I mean.
Facts.
But go on, Anna. Please.
I'm lost. Anyway.
Go on.
You were saying?
I don't remember, to be honest.
Oh no.
Oh.
But you were talking about your matrilineal ancestors.
It'll come back to me. Oh, I was saying how what I was what I was learning in this Ashkenazi folk magic course was that like in mainstream Judaism, it was like ancestral veneration was like done on specific like during a specific month,
Mm.
and there was like specific times. But like um so that was interesting to me.
Mm.
I mean, it's interesting to me as well because like we kind of like name check the eclipse, but also I think we've talked about Ramadan explicitly,
Yeah.
Mhm.
but I don't think we've talked about like Purim, have we?
Yeah, that happened. We kind of I think we might have in the episode about when we talked about Ramadan. We were like saying how it was like a pretty packed time of year. But yeah, Purim happened on Sunday, and we are in the month of Adar.
Hmm. And that
Are
was
we?
pretty
Yeah.
much when the eclipse happened as well, right? In the US.
Was it? Yeah, because wait a minute. Wait a
We
minute.
Yeah.
Whoa, 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 whoa. I just got so disoriented because when did the eclipse happen? I thought
I think it was over kind of like, I mean, depending on how you demark the days, but I would say it was a Sunday in the US.
oh my god. I'm sorry. The spiral Hoda said spiral gif in the chat, and that's what I'm experiencing right now.
Yeah, I mean, time's been wobbly for me during Ramadan, I would say, but I feel like it often is.
Yeah, I was gonna say the last 2 weeks have been, I mean, understandably a blur for me, so I
Yeah,
understand the time dilation.
for real.
Hmm. But do you want to say more about the adventures that you've had with your matrilineal ancestors, Anna?
Yeah.
Um, I don't. I mean, there's not really that much to report on. I don't think.
Mhm. Would you say it's more or less difficult than working with your patrilineal ancestors?
Or maybe that's a projection. Maybe I'm just full of projections about them.
Mm.
Mm. You
What
know
makes
what's
you
really
say that?
interesting? Oh, go on.
Well, I was wondering what made Anna say that, or like where, yeah, if you could say more.
About the projections. I feel like maybe I have like a lot of expectations of them.
Mhm.
You know,
Mm.
which is really interesting.
Can
Mhm.
I read out something that you posted in the Jewishness channel in the Sharia way, way,
Yeah.
way, way? All right, let
I
me
don't know
find
what
it.
it is, but okay.
Well, it was a tweet from um, Talmud,
Oh, that.
um, and
Hey,
I
Tal.
can't ask him if I can read it out, but it was public, so I feel like I
Yeah.
can, and I can ask you because you shared it. Anyway, um, you didn't say yes or anything, but I'm going to share it anyway because it's public. He said, "I am not, nor have I ever been, an quote occultist unquote, but I am a Jew, which is the same thing to the overculture." And I'd kind of made the connection to something I'd tweeted, not to like jump in on the, I don't know, like the Purim uh, riots, I want to call it. But I'd posted that, you know, my experience with being safe in darkness is that people unconsciously reach for the light switch and project. So when you said that, you know, you feel like you might project or have expectations of like your matrilineal ancestry, I guess the connection for me is like, you know, like occult generally means like hidden or secret, which I
Yeah.
think like
Yeah.
also probably for most people was synonymous with like being in the dark, right?
Totally.
Literally. And I feel like, yeah, when like not so much is known about something, then people tend to project on it.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that factors into your relationship to your matrilineal ancestors.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And yeah, I can definitely like relate to that, mostly through like colloquial obscurity, right? Like most people haven't really heard of my ancestors. They might assume that I'm
Right.
kind of East Asian, but they don't really know about
Mhm.
Hakka people because they're not really around that much. But people know
Yeah.
about gypsies, and people know definitely like in the Americas, they know more about like Jewishness. But
Mhm.
I feel like what they know about it is that they don't really know much about it.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes
Or
people think they know more about it than they actually know.
yeah, that's what I was kinda thinking too. Like, well, I think a lot of people have projections about
Exactly.
Jewish people, which is really interesting.
Hmm. And yeah, like a lot of them are like really crappy, I'll just say.
A lot of who?
A lot of the projections.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm assuming like your projections aren't crappy because I mean, you're doing a course on Ashkenazi folk magic.
No, I don't think they're like no, they're not of that sort.
Hmm. Do you feel like there is like I'm trying to find the words. Do you feel like there is like intentional hiding on the part of your matrilineal ancestors? You like not,
Mhm.
yeah,
I
okay,
get that sense.
yeah, and like,
Yeah, like,
go
whatever, fine.
on.
Be that way.
I got another question, and I'm gonna try and word this even more carefully. Do you feel like they're hiding from you, or do you feel like they're hiding from the overculture?
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, that is a great question. That is a really good fucking question. I mean, yeah, it's like, how do you work with yeah, I don't know how to put it into words, but yes.
And then I guess like the third question I have, which I hope I'm not throwing out too many questions, but I'll try and like throw it out underarm, um, with a little bit of backspin and a little bit of side spin. Um, wow, a bee just appeared. Um, anyway, is like, yeah, how much of it is like hiding on the part of like, let's say, just like your matrilineal ancestors? So I'm not making you speak for all these people. Um, how much
The
do you feel like
monolith.
it's like they're hiding versus like not being well seen by the overculture?
Mm, damn.
I mean, I could say for like my matrilineal and patrilineal ancestors that they tend to oscillate and like resonate with one another.
Hmm.
So it's like, so I've done a little bit of like, I wouldn't call it academic reading because I was probably like high 35% of the time as I was reading like academic work about Hakka people while not being very academic myself. Um, and like first of all, I think there's like a decent amount of general literature in that literature about like what ethnicity means. And I think like the understanding I came to from reading about that was that ethnicity is like very hard to trace, right? Like people can align it with language, people can align it with the places that people have been, the food they eat, the music they listen to, the rituals, the music that they dance to. I'll say in my culture because like they don't just listen. Um, but you know, like the rituals they have. But like Hakka people are not unified by any of those things. And I would sense that from my experience with Jewish lineages, the same can be said, right? Like there are different musics and foods and languages within the Jewish
Totally.
diaspora in my experience.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, I would say that like ethnicity tends to arise in these writings, the perspectives that are represented by these writings. Ethnicity tends to arise when there is like a resource dispute, and then people find conspicuous characteristics about other people and use those characteristics to discriminate about who gets access to resources and who doesn't. And only then does ethnicity become material. So, like, to weigh it in the concrete, I'll say that, like, in southern China, or like Guangdong mostly, let's say, like the Punti or the local Cantonese, or yeah, Cantonese, Canton and Guangdong are basically supposed to be from the same words, if I remember correctly. They were like all cool with the Hakka people, but then like when resource disputes occurred, then they were like, "Oh, you guys are Hakka and we're Punti, like we're locals
Wow.
and you guys are foreigners."
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, I would say like that led to separation, and then separation led to inaccurate projection, and
Mm.
then inaccurate projection often begot inaccurate projection the other way, and then there was violence, right? And then I would say there was like hiding.
Mm.
So, you know, the reason I put this out there is because I don't want to speak for other people's lineages, but I will speak for my lineages and the dynamic that's there. And, like, I guess anyone who's listening, but especially Anna, if you want to reflect on what comes up in that reflection, then I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for offering that.
And then I guess, like, the other thing I would say, if it's not too much, is it too much? I'm checking my body. It is too much. I'm just going to shut up.
I'm so curious now what you mean.
Well, if you insist, I'll say that like so like the Hakka on my patrilineal side is different to the Hakka on my matrilineal side, even though they grew up in different states on the eastern island of Malaysia. Eventually, that's like in the last generation, and then they came to the same place in Australia. Like they don't really understand each other when they speak, for instance, and they're very different culturally. But
Interesting.
I feel like the fact that they're both Hakka, which essentially means like guest people, like Kejiaoren, is like the Chinese, the Mandarin translation. It literally means guest people. I
Mm.
feel like there's some kind of like kinship there, right? Whereas I can imagine if people had like some ancestors who were not guest people or did not consider themselves guest people, and some ancestors who were, then maybe like that kind of hiding might occur.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, what they're saying aligns with my ancestral experience. Do you want to say more, Hannah?
Yeah, the term that was coming to me was like how ancestral temperaments kind of arise through conflict, like you said, as I was reflecting on that. And I feel like in my ancestry, I won't get into like the particularities of the way that that's split up, but the way that one part of my ancestry really dominates and like drives the overculture, or even if it was the overculture of a particular time, and the way that other parts of my ancestry were like subject to that overculture has always created like just a very interesting kind of path, I guess you can say. And also like overtures when it comes to my ancestral work. And just, I guess, to put it in perspective, it'll, I guess, for me, manifest as like parts of myself that tend to hide from other parts of myself, or other parts of myself that are like afraid of parts of myself, power. And so it gets really,
Mm.
Wow.
and intricate. And so yeah, that's what was percolating for me.
Yeah.
I love what you said. I mean, I loved a lot of what you said, but one of the things that you said was about being part of the overculture in certain times or spaces or both, right?
Mhm.
Which I feel is like really important because I feel like a lot of the discourse about like the overculture kind of, you know, like a lot of conversations which happen mostly in words. it
Mhm.
tends to like it tends to like outshine context, right? Like the words tend to like put the context in the shadow. And
Mhm.
I think like people end up like unconsciously assuming shared context or like some kind of universalist context.
Mm.
And I think
Yeah,
a lot of that nuance gets lost.
totally.
Yeah.
Um, and I think like it's probably more shared nowadays because of parasocial media and because of like globalization and the current mode of globalization. But I feel like, you know, what you mentioned sort of speaks for me like to times where cultures were a little bit more separate. Like, you know, it took them longer to like, you know, find one another geographically because they didn't have like telegrams and stuff.
Mhm.
And yeah, I feel like that's one thing about what you said. But then another thing that kind of came up is like I'm curious if like that those boundaries between, let's say, like underground and overground cultures or, you know, over cultures or under cultures, which sounds a little violent to me, but does that like divide cleanly between like your matrilineal and your patrilineal, or is it a little bit more subtle than that?
For me personally, it's a little bit more subtle, but I'd be curious
Yeah.
for if the overlap is similar for y'all or completely different.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like really nuanced because I think of like what I was saying about ethnicity emerging only when there was resource disparity.
Mhm.
Um, so it's like I have Hakka, I have like outsiders and insiders on both sides of my ancestry. Um, and I actually feel like it's really helpful. Like I think it's still true what you're saying about parts of myself hiding from other parts of myself, but then I think there's more collaboration on both sides, where it's like, let's say like the guest people, the Hakka people on my patrilineal and my matrilineal can kind of like negotiate a peace treaty with the settlers on my patrilineal. I'd say like that's probably the bulk of it.
Mhm.
um and you know, it strikes me as being like a blessing,
Yeah.
because I feel like it's almost like I can kind of like wind my way around the mountain of my ancestry.
Totally. Totally.
um and yeah, you know, like even I don't know if like anybody in this container would identify as being of like quote shielding quote mixed race unquote unshielding unquote, but that would tend to lead to like, I would say like more, I'll say balkanization of
Yeah.
ancestry.
I mean, yeah. It's just interesting because it's like I'm not mixed race, but like I do feel like that split is probably cleaner for me. Like cleaner as in like there's a
Mm,
split between like my patrilineal ancestors like being settlers and my matrilineal ancestors not being
mhm,
settlers and
Mhm.
like not being part of the overculture.
Mhm.
mhm, mhm.
So it
Um,
is a really particular dynamic.
Yeah.
yeah, I can imagine it being I'll say tough. I can imagine it being tough. I'm not projecting it.
I mean, it's not like you don't know me either, so. Yeah, I think it is. I think it is.
Yeah, and I also loved what you said about like not being mixed race because, you know, first of all, I think race is like really hard to locate physically in space and
Yeah.
time.
That part.
But I also feel like it kind of speaks to like a kind of unnameability, right? Like you can be like Hoda said, mixed soul. But it's like there is some like balkanization there, right? Like there's like some kind of mixing, but I would say that like it's like I'm kind of cheekily saying it's like the overculture doesn't really recognize delineations within what people might assume is whiteness, right? And this is like a constant topic in the group.
Totally. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like people just like, oh, you know, I'm white, but they don't recognize that there's mixed lineage. And I'd say like
Totally.
in Europe there's shit tons of mixed lineage and shit tons of conflict.
That's right.
And I don't feel like it's an accident, right? Like I think that mixing and that conflict led to the formation of whiteness and perhaps what I would call, from my perspective, what seems like an aversion to addressing the mixing and the conflict. And I would say that from my perspective and the perspective of my lineages, it doesn't help anything. It might have helped things at a certain point. Or it might have helped certain lineages at a certain point. I would say like likely mostly like Greco-Roman lineages, and probably did not super help like what are kind of like known as Celtic lineages of Europe. And I'm borrowing heavily from a lot of the great research that Psychonaut's been doing on this.
I know. I was like, where's Psychonaut when we need him?
I thought I saw him, but he I think he's also on the injury list.
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
he is. Damn.
He's feeling pretty injured, so I hope he feels better soon.
Yeesh. Me too.
We're talking about his work and mentioning his name in his absence, which is nice.
Yeah.
I would like that to happen in my absence. Well, I would
Same.
like that. I would also like to stay off the injury list. But yeah, I mean, I'll say like at the very least, I can imagine it making ancestral work difficult.
Yeah.
And I think that makes being a human in 2024 difficult, right?
Mhm.
I don't know. What do y'all think? Does ancestral work correspond with less difficulty? I feel like that's a spicy question.
Wait. Ask it again?
Like, do you feel like being able to get through ancestral work leads to less difficulty or more ease or more joy? Or does anybody?
Say it gets to the latter eventually.
Hopefully it gets to like being able to, I would say probably just gets to like being able to respond to different life circumstances with more ease.
That aligns for me.
I like that. Yeah, I feel like it gets right back to that thing about like whether people think of their ancestors as dumb and or primitive or not, right?
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I guess like my experience to kind of like touch upon what both of y'all said, I think is that like, I think sometimes, you know, and I think this is very aligned with my model of like work, is that like you kind of have to experience something to get in touch with ancestors who experienced it. And then you can do that work. And sometimes it's really difficult, actually. Maybe not more difficult than not doing it, but definitely a different flavor of difficult. Like I'll say for me, it tends to like put me in positions that people might not find enviable.
Do you think it's possible to do ancestor work without that?
I think it depends on your ancestors.
True. Very
And
true.
it also depends on the time, but mostly on the ancestors because we have lots of them, right? But
Yes.
you know, I was one of the first times I appeared in a podcast. It was As Woo Woo as You Like with Jeremiah Glazer.
Yeah.
I remember that.
I remember that too.
And Celine, who's an acupuncturist and an astrologer, but I forget her last name right now. And also, you know, I'd say like the quote ethnographic makeup of my understanding of people who are on parasocial media who do ancestral work is like changing as I consider that. But also, I haven't seen Jeremiah online for a while. But you know, I was talking about how some of my ancestors were just like really hardcore.
Yeah.
So it was like you really had to go through stuff to experience what they went through. And then working through it was also really hardcore. But then I would say that having access more cleanly to their wisdoms also made me able to endure other things with relative ease. And I think that kind of corresponds a lot to what Hoda was saying. But then, yeah, I'd say that, I mean, like the whole reason I was able to work with those ancestors is because I have been able to work with ancestors who were more easy to work with. So it's kind of like that building fire metaphor again that we've talked about a few times. And then I would say, yeah, like having worked through some of the really hard stuff, then working through other really hard stuff is relatively easy. But then also, you know, I think like more recently I've been working with like much easier stuff.
Ashe.
Well, I don't know, like my life circumstances are kind of gotten pretty hard as well, but it doesn't feel very hard. Well, something. Oh, yeah. So Lexi had said, I feel like my matrilineal hides from my patrilineal, and I think of my matrilineal hiding from itself because of differences in Egyptian lineages. I'm kind of curious if you want to say anything about that. Got some typing. Something Atlantis.
It's hilarious.
Man, I definitely want to imagine and not project on that. I'm curious if anybody else has any gnosis on it.
Murmur from
it feels super related, but I'm not getting much on it right now.
I mean, I'd say like in general, like what I'm kind of getting on it is that like Atlanteans were sort of known for like articulating a lot of stuff which was previously not articulated, or like writing stuff down which was previously like passed on like telepathically and orally, or like building things to facilitate and also stand in for ritual, when previously I would say ritual was like mostly an internal art. I'm kind of curious if that's like related from your perspective, Lexi. I guess like overall some kind of like, I mean, the external and the internal thing relates pretty heavily to like hiding versus showing. Or I would say like the practice of like asserting something versus like keeping it esoteric. And then I feel like, you know, like again, from my perspective and the perspective of my lineages, I would characterize perhaps sloppily that Western cultures tend to, in my experience, assert things without necessarily being conscious of like the space that they're taking. And if you're like familiar with my work and the way I express myself, and even just like the way I express myself and what I said before, like you'll notice that I was like very careful to say like this is my perspective and this is what's happening in my experience as I say this, but
Yeah.
I'm not saying it as if it's true. And I would say that it's more of a Western thing in my experience.
I cannot disagree.
Like they're definitely, I would say like in my experience of like non-diasporic East Asian culture, the way that people say things isn't really very different, but they just won't say things.
Mm.
But when they do say things, it's something like, this sucks. But like when they say it, it's less likely to cause conflict because they'll say it when other people don't mind hearing it or when everybody agrees. And there's sort of like I'll say like an energetic kind of like coherence or resonance there. And I think like I often say that we're always projecting, but we only notice it when the projection's misaligned with our own projection, right?
Right.
So like mapping this back to what I was saying in a very general sense and likely to be inaccurate in many contexts. Um, I think the general tendency in the West is to like say things which other people disagree with without sort of checking in with whether that what they're saying is aligned or whether disagreement is being welcomed.
Yeah.
And I'd say that in my experience, it happens less in other cultures. But of course, like I've only been on Earth for 40 years and I'm drawing from the experience of my ancestors, but that's what I feel.
Yeah. The other thing that I learned that was really interesting from this Ashkenazi folk magic class is that there's like parts of Ashkenazi folk magic that were like specifically about like how you say things. Like you say like the opposite thing that you actually mean.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
Wow. Can you
so
say
that
that? Could you give me an example of that?
it's like honestly, it's like kind of confusing. So it's like you would like say something to like if something is bad, you would like purposely say like the opposite to like obscure people to like obscure something.
Mm.
And I was like,
Like not like sarcasm, like humor.
no, not like no, just like for like to like ward off demons.
Oh, that's fucking
Ow.
fascinating to me.
Type D. Like you just like say the opposite thing. And I was like,
That's
whoa.
super interesting. That sounds like
I
really
know.
interesting tech.
Yeah. But it's just interesting because like that's not really anything that was like I've never received that transmission like
Mm-hmm.
you know from my matrilineal ancestors. Like that's not something that they practiced.
Mm. Would you say they were hiding it? Or
Mm,
would you say that
no, I think
perhaps it
that
was?
like a lot of transmission was lost through
Yeah,
generations.
I was gonna say like maybe the opposite happened, which is that like it was kind of drowned out by other
Exactly.
ancestral transmissions.
Exactly.
Hmm.
That's my sense.
That aligns for me, and I think it aligns with what. So like Lexi was saying, assertion reminds me of my patrilineal ancestry, and then Hodo was saying, I feel like a big thing in African diasporic cultures is a vibe of quote, who even asked you all that, unquote. But yeah, I think it all speaks to like how like assertions or assertivity can just sort of like not leave space for other lineages to transmit their wisdoms, right?
Yeah.
How rude.
I'll say this out loud because I remembered how I watched Guns, Germs, and Steel the other day.
Mm.
This is not a straight line of conversation, but whatever. I feel like watching Guns, Germs, and Steel, like if you have ancestors that were like colonizers, quote unquote, I feel like I would recommend that movie for you.
Which
If
is
you're
probably
listening to
like a
this,
lot of people.
which is probably a lot of people.
But is asking why.
I just feel like there was something about the way that it was presented that like kind of like neutralized the charge for me a little bit.
Mm.
And I was just kind of like, whoa, like I feel like I can like view these ancestors with like a lot more compassion than I had previously.
Ew.
And I was just like, damn.
Where did you watch Guns, Germs, and Steel, Anna?
I watched it on my laptop.
Okay, everybody, if you want to watch Guns, Germs, and Steel, you have to get your hands on Anna's laptop. Is that the conclusion?
No, what?
How would people who might be listening to this podcast listen to or watch Guns, Germs, and Steel without stealing your laptop or renting it from you?
Sorry, I'm just like that felt obvious to me. I feel like we talked about this the other day. I just typed it in on Google, and I guess Amazon Prime had it, and you can just like rent. There's like 3 separate episodes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is that all of the episodes?
Yeah, there's only 3. I was
Wow.
kind of surprised.
That sounds like way less time than it took me to read the book. So,
yeah.
yeah.
I imagine.
And like, what kind of laptop do you have, Anna?
I have a MacBook Air.
Okay. So y'all heard it. You can watch Amazon Prime, Guns, Germs, and Steel on a MacBook Air, which isn't Anna's. But yeah, I'm just kind of like doing a piss take of a product placement. But you can read the book too, or you can have it read to you by somebody, I guess. Hopefully not a robot on Audible or something like that. Like I read the book and it probably took me like 4 or 5 weeks. So depending on like your proclivities and stuff.
It's a dense ass book. It was one of those ones that had like kind of I told the other tenders in the tending call last week. I was like, this is something that I like have always wanted to read, but I was just like, I know myself, like the way my attention is set up.
Totally.
The documentary was much more viable for me.
Hoda is also naming the option of having a lover read it to you, which sounds pretty cool.
That sounds so romantic.
With a Q.
With a Q. Yes. Exactly.
Yes.
That sounds like a great suggestion. I mean, I'd love to talk about it, but I also feel like the container is not set up for it.
Yeah.
But God, I really want to talk about it.
Suffice it to say, like, just give some love to your colonizer ancestors. Please.
I feel like yes, that should be a general rule. Like speaking of percentages, that's how we get the percentage up. Start with your colonizer ancestors first.
Totally. And ask them about your colonized ancestors, maybe? What would you say about that?
Yeah, like get the full story, you mean?
Wow, I love that.
It's like product placement for metaphysical services or something, but
that's amazing. I hope literally.
Oh yeah, Hoda's saying, I think this is a good reminder. If you would like some kind of assistance working with ancestors, You know, in my experience, it's really good to work with people who have like really good ancestral connections. And I feel like many of us in the room, I feel like Hoda, you have like great ancestral connections. I really like my ancestral connections. Some people don't like them, so I wouldn't necessarily unilaterally recommend booking time with me.
I like yours too.
some people, some people like tried to like end me or something, and then they ended up in hospital. So if you're someone who feels like you might try to like take my soul and end up in hospital from it,
They're
then
not for everybody.
maybe not work with me. But if you feel like you can take my soul without ending up in hospital and you want to try and take my soul, then I recommend you try and take my soul.
What an
But otherwise,
invitation.
Jeez.
but otherwise, book Hoda or book Anna.
Once I set up a website.
Or if you just want to work with me and my ancestors, you can book me too. I guess I'm feeling like this container is like pretty rounded up, and it's called Roundup. But how do y'all feel?
Agreed.
Should we
I feel
round out?
pretty good. Yeah. Peace out, Craig. Love you, Brown King.
Peace out, Craig. Thank you all for listening. If you want to find out more about joining the Broom Radio Live, or I don't know if Shopify allows me to make donations because they're weird. But if you want to find out more about like booking time with any of us, then I think we'll put the details in the show notes. But regardless of what you choose to do, I feel like ancestral work is coming, and I feel like it's going to be like sweet. So say hi to your ancestors for me, and peace.
Peace, y'all.
Bye.